This place, the Otis River in Alaska, has always attracted bears. They fished here for trout during the migration period. I set up my cameras just before the bears came for lunch. The cameras were well protected, weighed a lot, and setting them up on tripods was the hardest part of my job. This is my profession. I photograph wildlife. By the way, my name is Anna. I adore my job, and I have chosen it because I love animals to the moon and back. And today, I'm going to tell you a story about how the animals loved me back. Having finished installing cameras, I lay in wait on a hillock with a great view. The bears appeared pretty soon. They settled down in the middle of the riverbed. They were fishing with their powerful teeth and long claws. A female bear with 2 cubs caught my attention. She came pretty close to my hideout. Finally, she stopped, having seen a fish. But suddenly, she raised her head and seemed to look directly at me. Her behavior scared me a lot, and I jerked and accidentally broke a branch. The crunch was so loud that it attracted the attention of the mother bear. She gave up fishing and went in my direction, clearly sensing in this sound a danger to her babies. The bear was already very close. I could not move from fear. I was shaking. Never before in my career as a photographer had I been in such a dangerous situation. Finally, the instinct of self-preservation turned on, and I decided that just lying and waiting for death was not a good idea. I got to my feet and slowly backed away, waiting for the right moment to escape. But the bear, who was guarding her cubs, only got angry because of it. She abruptly sped off and rushed straight at me. Having thrown my camera, I decided to flee. I was running and kept hearing a spine-chilling roar behind me, but I had to stop abruptly. There was a steep cliff right ahead of me. As I turned around, I saw the bear standing a few steps away from me and intently examining me, as if thinking what to do with me next. I regretted that I had no weapon with me. I had never shot and never wanted to do it, but I would have had to pull the trigger if the bear had decided to pounce on me. The animal seemed to have read my mind and decided to attack. Without thinking, I took a step back, straight into the abyss. I did not fall for long. After a moment, I hit the ground. Then I had a couple of turns. I tried to tuck myself up in order not to get seriously injured. I managed to stop only thanks to a tree, into which I flew in on the move. I was lying flat on the cold ground and watching the clouds run in the frosty sky. This was the last thing I remembered before passing out. I regained consciousness because something cold and wet was touching my face. I opened my eyes and gulped with fear. A wolf was licking me. I slowly crawled back, trying not to anger the animal. Even if I had really wanted to, I would not have been able to crawl quickly. The consequences of falling off the cliff made themselves felt. The wolf also took a couple of careful steps. The predator was staring at me, growling and baring its teeth. Suddenly, it stretched out its head and began to howl. Dozens of voices replied to it. The pack was somewhere nearby. I looked around, and now I noticed that other wolves were hiding behind the trees and watching us. Perhaps this wolf was their alpha male. The alpha male decided to come closer without stopping growling. I thought about the backpack on my back. Fortunately, it was not damaged in the fall. Trying not to make any sudden movements, I took it off from my shoulder and took out the bag of food, which I had taken with me. All these actions were given to me with great effort. My shoulder was aching terribly. I untied the bag and laid it gently on the ground, with a gesture as if inviting the wolf to have dinner. The wolf sniffed the food suspiciously and then began to eat it greedily. I noticed blood on the ground, right under his paw. After looking more closely, I saw an arrowhead sticking out of it. What kind of jerk could have chosen such a cruel way of hunting? I carefully reached out my hand to the injured paw. The wolf growled but did not resist. Grabbing the shaft of an arrow, I broke it. Then with a swift movement of my hand, I yanked out the rest of the arrow. The wolf yelped in pain and jumped back. The pack ran out of their hiding places and surrounded me. All were baring their teeth, growling, and were apparently waiting for the command from their leader to tear me to shreds. The alpha himself at this moment was licking the wound on his paw. Finally, limping, he came up to me, baring his teeth. I was ready to say goodbye to my life, but the wolf didn't even think to attack. He just licked my cheek. I was immediately forgiven by the others. They came closer, sniffing with their noses. I could not even imagine that I would become friends with wolves. Soon, after losing all interest, the wolves hid among the trees, leaving me completely alone. It was time to call for help. But then another unpleasant surprise awaited me. My mobile phone had fallen out of my pocket, and I had no idea where it was now. I tried to get up, but felt a sharp pain in my leg. It was so intense that I immediately thought that it had been fractured. I really wanted to hope that it was just a dislocation or a severe bruise. It was getting dark, and I could not get up on my feet. It seemed that my luck had been gone. The wolves had not torn me to pieces, but now frost and hunger would definitely finish me off. How long would it take before they realized I was missing? Towards the nightfall, when it was already unbearably cold, my furry friends came back. The pack leader lay down next to me first. Then, following his example, the other wolves surrounded me. Their warm fur warmed and saved me that night. When I woke up in the morning, the wolves had been gone. The pain in my leg was no longer unbearable, and by leaning on a stick that I found, I was even able to walk. I started thinking about how to get out, but I realized very quickly that I had no idea where I was exactly. Without a navigator and a map, I could hardly find myself around in the forest, although I had been there several times. Therefore, I decided to stay in place, so as not to get lost even more and ease the work of my rescuers, who, as I was sure, would definitely find me. Another question was, when? I started picking branches to make a fire. By the evening, I had found enough firewood and warmed myself by the fire, but my stomach was empty as I had given my last meal to the wolf. But my gray friends saved me again. The wolves returned to my improvised camp. The alpha came up to me and threw the dead hair on the ground. Perhaps this was his way of thanking me. I had to fiddle around with the hair, but finally managed to fry it on the fire. The other wolves, curious about the tasty smell, moved closer. At first, I waved them off with my hand, but it did not help. Then I growled, making it clear that I was not going to share. So, I spent several days surrounded by wolves, until finally I was able to walk without the aid of a stick, though stepping on the foot was still painful. During this time, I became a part of their pack. Once, while I was walking through the woods, I heard a howl. Despite the pain in my leg, I rushed to help. A terrible scene appeared in front of me. The hunters had surrounded several wolves, aiming their guns at them. I ran out to the hunters. "Stop! Do not shoot!" "And who is this?" one hunter asked another, astonished. "This is a protected area. Hunting is prohibited." In order to look more convincing, I growled. The hunters, or more correctly, poachers, lowered their weapons and looked at each other. "Lady, you seem to have become quite wild. Wait, Steve. It seems that this is the very photographer who's been missing." I got delighted. "Are they looking for me?" "Yes, come with us. You seem to need help." He pointed to my torn trouser leg. I didn't want to abandon my wolves. It was hard to leave them, but the hunters were right. I needed a doctor. I sat down on one knee, and the wolves immediately surrounded me. They were licking my face and hands. "I have to go. Thank you for everything." It was very hard to say goodbye to the pack. They had saved my life, but it was time to go. I got up and followed the hunters. As I was leaving, a pitiful howl came out behind me. The wolves were saying goodbye to me, and I could not hold back my tears. In the evening, I was dining at the hunter's guest house, and I was munching so loudly that everyone was looking sideways at me. When they wanted to take my plate from me, I growled loudly. The hunters looked at each other, and one of them said, "I would advise you to chew your food." I glared at him angrily and began to gnaw at the bone. "How is your leg?" The doctor said that if I regularly use the ointment, the pain will soon disappear. "I've checked the flight schedule. You can fly to the city today. We'll give you a lift." So I did that, and in the evening I returned home. After coming to my senses a little, I decided to search for information about wolves on the internet. These amazing animals had literally conquered me, and I wanted to know everything about them. I went to bed very late, and despite the fact that sleeping in a bed was a heavenly delight, I had a very bizarre dream. In the dream, I found myself again in the forest running somewhere with my pack. Suddenly, the alpha male stopped and looked anxiously in the distance. There, high on a hillock, a hunter was standing and aiming directly at him with his rifle. I immediately rushed to the hunter to stop him, but I was too late. A shot rang out. I woke up in a cold sweat and did not immediately realize that it had just been a dream. After the nightmare, it was impossible to fall asleep. I opened the window to get some fresh air. There was a full moon in the sky, and I suddenly wanted to howl unbearably. I understood that this was impossible, but I hoped that my pack would be able to hear me. Taking as much air as possible in my lungs, I began to sing a sad song. My pitiful howl woke up all the neighbors. They started shouting from the windows something about a mental hospital and I should just shut up. But I did not listen to them. My wolf song had carried me away. When I finished howling, I heard a loud knock on my door. Those were my neighbors. When I opened the door, the occupants of the house started shouting at me all at the same time. I understood that I shouldn't have behaved this way and already wanted to sincerely apologize, but they wouldn't even let me get a word out. One of them even crossed the threshold of my apartment and began to point his finger at me. "You behave like an animal. You don't belong in our house." I was growling at him, and he kept poking his fat finger at me. Then I could not resist, and I bit the nasty neighbor on his finger. He screamed in pain, "Get out of our house!" With pleasure. The neighbors, after I had attacked one of them, got scared and no longer tried to enter my house. So I slammed the door right in front of their faces. Climbing back into bed, I thought that probably I should not have bitten my neighbor. But what had come over me? Apparently, a few days spent in the forest with wolves had affected my mental health. But I had just been protecting my home from the invasion of strangers. People are so strange. They call you an animal, but they themselves behave inappropriately. They kill animals for fun, fight with each other, not giving a chance to explain themselves. I wish I could live in the woods, away from such neighbors. At that moment, I made a decision. In the morning, I made a couple of calls, after which I happily began to pack my things, and in the evening, I was already flying on the plane. And where to, do you think? To Alaska. I turned on the light in the little hut. A uniform jacket with my name was already hanging on the hanger. The reserve had been looking for a forester, and I volunteered to take this position. I went outside and started my pickup. I left my car by the same river Otis. It was impossible to drive further. I covered another 10 kilometers on foot. This seemed to be the place where I had left them. I filled my lungs with air and howled as loudly as I could. Soon I heard cautious steps. Eyes lit up in the darkness. The alpha male of the pack appeared first. He was sniffing. After a couple of seconds, the others followed him. The wolves ran up to me, threw me to the ground, and began licking my hands and face. I was ruffling their furry backs. Now, I will not go anywhere. Not go anywhere. Not go.